Hi, it's Scott here from MoneyNerd, and I help people beat debt collectors and become debt free. In this quick video, I'm going to show you how to deal with Lantern Debt Recovery Services. You probably received a letter from Lantern Debt Recovery or even had them knocking at your door. When I had debt collectors chasing me back in 2010, it caused me a lot of stress and anxiety. But since then, I've worked in the credit card industry, and I'm happy to say I've been able to use my insider knowledge to help thousands of people out of debt. So today, I'd like to share that knowledge by answering 5 frequently asked questions, such as how to reduce your repayment amounts, how to stop Lantern debt collectors from contacting you, what happens if you ignore them, and what they're not allowed to do when they're collecting on your debt. At the end of this video, I have a bonus tip on how to write off some of your debt, so stick around to the end. Okay, question number 1. Are Lantern debt recovery legitimate? Well, if you've received a letter in the post, this is probably your first question. If you don't recognize the company name, it might be that they've purchased your debt or they're a debt collector collecting on behalf of another company. I can confirm that Lantern is a UK registered company, and whilst there are a bunch of scams out there when it comes to debt collectors, I'm afraid this is unlikely to be a scam. However, you should never pay unless you're certain that the debt is yours. You're well within your rights to ask Lantern to provide proof that the debt is yours, and I have a free letter template on my website, which I'll link to in the description below. Okay, question number 2. What happens if you ignore Lantern debt recovery? Well, if you ignore debt collectors, your problem could escalate and become very serious. Lantern debt collectors could take court action against you, and they have the right to do that. If you were to ignore court letters, you could end up with a county court judgment, or what you might recognise as a CCJ. You could have this will have a major impact on your credit score and your chances of borrowing money in the future. If you do get a CCJ and you still don't pay, it could ultimately result in bailiffs coming to your home to take your valuable items or even your car. So please don't ignore them, and we'll get to what you should do later in this video. Question number 3. What are Lantern not allowed to do? Well, despite being legally appointed to collect your debt or outright owning your debt, there's several things that Lantern debt collectors cannot do when it comes to collecting your debts. Knowing that Lantern must uphold the standards set out by regulatory guidelines will make you feel a lot more comfortable and confident when dealing with them. So here's the things they're legally not allowed to do. They're not allowed to visit your place of work without you giving them specific permission to do so. Before this rule was in place, some debt collectors would show up while you're working and try and make things awkward for you as a way of pressuring you into paying. And on a similar note, they're not allowed to speak to neighbours, friends, or family about your debt. Again, this is to stop them to try and embarrass you or shame you into paying your debt. Lantern Debt Recovery can't visit your home or call you at unreasonable times of the day. For phone calls, most people would agree that calls before 8 a.m. are too early and calls after 9 p.m. are too late. But your circumstances might be different. For example, if you work night shifts. If you can't take calls during certain times of the day, tell them. They should keep a record of this and avoid calling you at these times. And you can make a complaint if you've told them and they're calling you at times that you've told them to avoid. If they're not allowed to act in a threatening or intimidating way, and they should never pressurize you into paying larger installments than you can afford or hitting payments or deadlines that are impossible. Regulations also say that they're not allowed to pressure you into selling your house or to take out more credit to pay your debts. And finally, debt collectors can't pretend to be bailiffs or enforcement agents. Unlike bailiffs or enforcement agents, debt collectors can't force their way into your house or refuse to leave when you ask them to do so. And they're certainly not allowed to take any of your belongings or clamp your car. Okay, question number 4. How long can you be chased for debt? Well, under the Limitations Act of 1980, a creditor has up to 6 years to chase most unsecured, unpaid debts, or 12 years for some mortgage debts. This limitation period starts from the time that you last made a payment or that you last acknowledged the debt. If a CCJ has been registered against you before that limitation period is passed, then it can be enforced at any point because there's no limitation period for a CCJ. Also, the Limitation Act doesn't apply to debts owed by the government. So, like income tax, benefit overpayments, and council tax. This means that these types of debts can be collected even after 6 years have passed. Okay, last question. Then I have a bonus tip on how to potentially write off some of your debt. Question number 5 is, how do I pay less and come to an agreement with Lantern debt collectors? Well, there's a number of ways you might be able to reduce the amount you pay. If you're struggling to reduce the repayment amounts, there's several options you could explore. If Lantern are adding interest and charges to your debt, then you could ask them to freeze them to help you get back on track quicker and to clear those debts quicker. Debt collectors are more likely to stop interest and reduce charges if you can prove that you're in financial difficulty. I'd suggest you put together a budget to show your income and your essential living costs so you can clearly demonstrate your financial difficulties. You can also use that budget to negotiate reduced payments. Again, for this, you'll need to show why you can't afford high repayments. So use that budget to write down your income and your essential living costs so you can demonstrate what you can afford. Sometimes debt collectors will only agree to reducing your payments for a set period of time, and then they'll want to review and update your situation. Other times they'll agree to much longer repayment periods. All of this will totally depend on the nature of your debt and your individual circumstances. If you have the cash, you could make a full and final settlement offer. This is where you ask them if you can pay a lump sum instead of the full balance that you owe. In return for having that lump sum, some debt collectors will agree to write off the remainder of the debt. And as promised, here's my bonus tip on how you might be able to write off some of your debt. And it's not just with Lantern, by the way. If you have debts with other people, there's lots of ways you can significantly reduce your repayments and even write off some of your debt. During my career in the credit card industry, I gained a lot of insider knowledge, and as a result, I identified 7 relatively unheard of debt solutions. The industry doesn't really advertise these, as most of them are either free or low cost. Now, unfortunately, these solutions are not available to everybody. You do need to be in specific circumstances, but there's probably at least one of these solutions that you do qualify for. You could either be paying less than you already do right now, or maybe even write off some of your debt. To make it simple for you, I've created a free eligibility checker, which I've linked to in the description below. It's just 5 simple questions and takes less than 30 seconds to find out if you can reduce your repayments and maybe even write off some of your debt. So click the link in the description below and go and do that now.